Hello and welcome to today's KDP University's At Home with Steven Konkoly. I'm Trisha, and for the past almost 5 years, I've moved around Amazon's books teams, learning the business so I can share it with authors. Prior to coming to Amazon, I worked as a graphic artist, project manager, and educator. But enough about me. We're all here to talk to Steven. Steven is the Wall Street Journal and Washington Post best-selling author of over 20 novels and novellas. Steven graduated from the United States Naval Academy, receiving a Bachelor of Science in English Literature. He served the next 8 years on active duty, traveling the world as a naval officer assigned to various Navy and Marine Corps units. Steven's in-house experience with a wide range of regular and elite military units brings a unique authenticity to his thrillers. And to this day, he still wakes up at 0 dark 30 to write before breaking early to spend as much time as possible with his family. Welcome, Steven.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Well, we appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, I probably have to correct the bio. I don't, as much as I like to say I wake up at 0 dark 30 anymore, that habit is kind of gone by the wayside. Although, in central
Oh,
Indiana, 0 dark 30 can be like 8:30 in the morning. So, it's kind of a, it's a little stretch. So,
I understand that. That is true. Well, I want to thank you, first of all, for your military service.
sure, thank you. Yeah.
Mhm, absolutely. So let's start with a little bit of background. Let's start by talking a little bit about when you decided that being an author was your calling.
Okay, I do love telling this story because I kind of almost turned myself an accidental author. I had I had a very non-traditional start to what many consider like an author career. It's never been something that I've always wanted to do. It's never been something that's really been in my mind. I served 8 years in active duty, and then I was working as a pharmaceutical rep with Pfizer, and you know after a while, I just was finding that I could get most of my Pfizer work done very early in the day, and I'm totally one of these work smarter, not harder types. So I was really looking for something else to do, and yeah, it's funny. I just kind of like got this bug to start researching viruses and pandemics. This was actually 2007. It was before swine flu in 2008 hit. I'd always been a real fan of books like The Hot Zone and things like that. So
Mhm.
I started looking into it. And it's funny. It's almost like there was no real intention to start a story, but once I started digging into the research, I just the story just kept bubbling to the surface. My first book, The
Mhm.
Jakarta Pandemic, and it just kind of kept taking off, and I was researching and taking notes and kind of character sketches, and it's one of those things. I didn't tell my wife I was writing the novel for, geez, I think I was about a quarter of the way through, maybe even halfway through the word count. And it's just like, I think I'm actually writing a book right now. And I was. And so I brought her on board, and yeah, it just kind of became this thing. 180,000 words later, way too many words. I mean, I knew nothing about writing. I mean, to
Uh-huh.
the point of this, I had never looked into it. I'd never taken a craft session or really looked into anything like that. So I had this 180,000 word mess on my hands, which I thought was a good story. And I just didn't know what to do with it. And I just like, it would be silly to just let this sit here because, I felt like it was a valuable, a worthwhile story to tell. So
Mhm.
yeah, I started researching options, and I very, very quickly determined that the traditional publishing route, as attractive as that is, it just seemed, this I felt like this book was going to sit around for years. This story
Mhm.
would not get out at all, and like I just want people to be able to read it. Like
Mhm.
family, without having to email them a 180,000 word file. So I very quickly found Kindle Direct Publishing, and it just seemed very easy, and it was. And seriously, within like I had to figure out how to format. I didn't have a team then. I figured it all
Hmm.
out. So within a week, I had a book. I was pressing, send or up, whatever. Yeah, pressing the button, and the book was published within about a week and a half of, really even just starting research into KDP, and
Oh,
just
wow.
started selling after. I mean, first, it was like my parents, my brother, every relative and friend that, felt sorry for me, bought it. But it then just started to pick up steam, and I'm like, wow, I'm like, this is crazy. Like there are people that are actually buying this and leaving reviews, and you know, and it led me to like do more digging in and polish up I did an edit, started hiring a team, and just really honed this product down to, what is still today like I would say my best selling book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So any urge to go back and do additional edits to it? How much editing did you have to do after you published it the first time?
This book has been through about 5,000 edits. It's, no, it's probably the most heavily edited book in human history. Has to be. It really has gone through a lot. I wrote it in like, what would you call it, first person, like, it was
Hmm.
just, which, a number of books are written that way. I think very cinematically when I'm writing. So I think, that sort of point of view lends to, a cinematic
Hmm.
mind. But it just, that was one of the few, that was a key complaint in the reviews. And I thought, and that's the great thing about the entire system is, you can get feedback and reviews, and you can actually do something about it. Outside of
Hmm.
it, you have complete control of the system. So, I kept going back. Yeah, I hired an editor to change that all to past tense. That editor did not like me at that. I don't think she knew what she was signing on for. But we compensated her for that was a lot of work. Um, but yeah, it has been edited several times since, and right now it's in the throes of another edit. My wife is going back through and kind of, I don't say modernizing the story, but
Oh, okay. Mhm.
yeah, I mean, it was written, I started it, actually 13 years ago. So it's just very little things. I'm not turning this into a COVID-19 novel, but, I just want to bring, there's certain aspects of it. Like, I put certain dates and times, and I think I've learned since
Mhm.
then to kind of just, it's better just to kind of make something timeless and let it go from there. So, but yeah, it's in another edit, believe it or not. I mean, it's never ending with that book.
Well, that's a good call out. Is the timelessness and making sure that, because I've heard that from several authors that eventually you have to kind of refresh because the technology changes, right? In our
Right.
the way our. Mhm.
Yeah, that is one of the things that, going through. I mean, there's no streaming services or deliveries, and whether we'll add stuff like that to it, I don't know, because who knows what, like you said, you lock yourself into one thing. But it is a nice. I mean, the story itself, it doesn't impact the story. The story is the same. I
Right.
would never change the actual story itself, but kind of modernizing and changing things like that. I think as the
Mhm.
first book I wrote, and kind of an entry into my work, because a lot of people do start with that. It has a
Mhm.
lot of reviews. Yeah, we wanted to just feel fresh and just keep being. So it's like a living story, or
Mhm.
I guess that's the right word. Yeah.
All right. So one thing you talked about is the reviews and how you use the reviews. And I've heard from a lot of authors that they don't either read the reviews or because it can be hard, right? But I find it really interesting that you use the reviews, and that's something that I've suggested before. Can you talk a little bit about that and why you made that decision?
Yeah, I think as a beginning, not. I mean, like I always felt like why penalize myself with you know sticking with one thing. That's really what I liked about this. Once I embraced it, and in the beginning, I read every one of my reviews. I'd sit there, I'm like, I can't count the number of times I'm like, about to type, like, you know, you don't understand. You learn over time as an author, and I would give that advice as a new author now. People gave me that advice. I did not take it right away. It took a little while to develop a bit of a thicker skin when people
Mhm.
are criticizing, and a lot of it was good criticism. So I'm like, it's
Mhm.
positive criticism. Why not take that? I figured if I'm alienating even 5% of readers with a first-person perspective, which I wasn't married to, I
Mhm.
just didn't essentially know what I was doing. I mean,
Right.
funny because people are like, you realize you wrote it like that, and I'm like, oh, I don't know, like that's not like, you know, and I flipped through like 10 novels on my in my bookshelf. Wow, I'm like, they're all in the past tense. I'm like, this is crazy. It was like present tense is what I was writing in. And I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, okay. I'm like, yeah, I don't think I would like a book like that. You know, so you become like you do become kind of blind to your own, you know, like I can't edit my own stuff. I think most authors, you know, they'll give it a quick read through, but in terms of like seeing your own flaws, you know, I think that's part of the human condition. So the reviews are
Hmm.
helpful. I mean, you know, today I'm not going to take a plot point or, you know, oh, I think that character should have been this, but you know, if I get a lot of complaints about a certain character type, you know, for my next series or next book, I may not introduce a character like that because, you know,
Hmm.
it's, you know, once again, you know, we are trying to sell books, tell stories, and make a living. So, you know,
Right.
why diminish any of that?
Exactly. Exactly. Now, what genre do you primarily write in?
I would say primarily, you know, thriller. I mean, every book I write is at heart a thriller.
Hmm.
That's definitely what I've shifted over to write in now. And a lot of them they're borderline techno thrillers. I like to incorporate technology. I love thinking about new stuff. You know, kind of keep readers guessing. You know, does this exist? Does it not exist? I wrote a near future dystopian kind of thriller, which it's termed dystopian just because it's, you know, 20 years in the future, or yeah, 20, 25 years. And I had the most fun with that book, you know, creating the technology that was familiar enough but different enough for readers to enjoy. That I got the most feedback and emails on that. And like, does this exist? And you know, half of it didn't exist at the time, or I'd read like a concept of it and I just kind of created it.
Uh-huh.
So definitely thrillers. I wrote in the post-apocalyptic genre for yeah, about 2, 3, 4 years. You know, so I
Hmm.
and you know the Jakarta pandemic is technically by many people considered post-apocalyptic because it deals with
Hmm.
a worldwide pandemic and it's pretty extreme. But it, you know, once again, I consider it more of a, you know, I do consider it more of a thriller. I didn't even realize it was post-apocalyptic until, you know, the reviewers were like, great, great, great post-apocalyptic book. I'm like, what is this post-apocalyptic thing? I'm like, huh. And then I look into it. I'm like, oh yeah, I guess yeah, it does fit right into that. So yeah, sometimes call myself like a little bit. My career has been a little bit genre mixed, confused because you know I have a crossover readership of people who just like post-apocalyptic stuff, and
Uh-huh.
it's been a challenge to bring them along into the thriller books. But I think a lot of them have taken the journey because they've enjoyed the characters.
So let's look at that for just a second. I know that that's a question we get from a lot of brand new authors is, I'm not quite sure what genre I fit in,
Yeah,
right?
right. No, yeah, I could see it's and when you read the descriptions of the different genres, I mean, there's all kinds of different types of books and breakdowns. And I think through the KDP system and the Amazon, just the Amazon sales page, you can really dig into those subgenres.
Hmm.
So if people are, really just can't figure out where they fit. I mean, I think most people when they write, they probably have like a book. We all have inspirations as authors, authors we really like and we think we fit in. I mean, I would highly suggest really digging into the Amazon page and trying to find those subgenres. You go to thriller, ebooks, thrillers, and then dig through there. It's also obviously available in KDP. There's tons of choices when you go to like publish your book, where you can select
Hmm.
the categories and subcategories. But finding that out ahead of time, that does make a big difference. Because you most definitely want to be targeting the right people with your books.
Right, right. So this is the question that everybody kind of loves, hates, and
I hate it. I'm kidding.
that's the one about who's your favorite character from your books.
Yeah. Um, I love them all. I'm not kidding. Um, no, I've been asked this before, and I would have to say I keep going back to the first character that I would say I fully developed in a series, and that would
Hmm.
be the Daniel Petrovich character from Black Flagged, because it was truly the first character I created from scratch, wanting a new kind of, calling it an antagonist, although some people don't like him. That's my wife at one point. It's like, can you just start writing characters that people like? right off the bat. And I'm like, no, no, that's, yeah, I don't, I can't make it easy. Well, I make it easy on my readers. So, most of my readers, I'll spend a book in a series figuring out, do I like this woman or this guy? I mean, I don't know. I wanted to create like a real, what I call a gray area character,
Hmm.
something different. It's very hard to come up with. I mean, it's hard to come up with different characters, and there's thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of books, and it's hard to not be influenced by what you've read in the past. And I mean, I know Daniel
Right.
Petrovich is probably a compilation of 50 different characters. I mean,
Mhm.
I know he is. I mean, I know for a fact. Um, but he's definitely my favorite character because he comes from a background that's very different than most characters in that genre. He's not a former special operator. He's ex-military, but he did something in the military completely outside of what he was essentially recruited to do later and
Mhm.
trained to do. And I kind of like that idea of taking a regular person who just fit a certain psychological profile that people, the evil masters in DC or at the Department of Defense determine we can turn this person into what we want, not
Mhm.
take the skills he already has and shape those, but really create someone from scratch in terms of skills, but not necessarily mentality wise. I mean, Daniel Petrovich has always been who he is. So yeah, long answer long answer to that question is Daniel Petrovich is definitely my favorite character.
So you got into self-publishing like we talked about pretty early on when self-publishing was, kind of booming. Can you talk a little bit about the changes that have happened through, your experiences with maybe, let's talk about marketing back when you first started versus what it looks like now.
Right, right. Yeah, things have definitely changed. I mean, I don't want to call it like the gold. I mean, it's all still the golden age. Golden age lasts a long time, but um, the big change, and I'll use me as a great example is,
Mhm.
my first book did look like a mess. It's gone through 50 cover changes, in addition to edits. First cover I created, I think I created on Create Space Editor, long back. I mean, this is, you can see how long ago this occurred. And it
Mhm.
was, I still, every time I see it, I'm like, oh God, like, why would anyone have bought that book? It just looks terrible. But it looked good, but it looked great to me at the time. And
Right.
so back then, that was it. You didn't have to have necessarily a great cover. You can get stuff out, get stuff out there. And if the story was good, you know, and, and you targeted it right, and it got good reviews off the bat, you could build some momentum. I think today,
Mhm.
the big change is you have to start. You have no choice but to start with a very professional looking product. So and you don't have to spend an a crazy amount of money on a cover, but you do have to spend some. I always say
Mhm.
you have to look at it as an investment. Unless you're a graphic designer or really good with. I mean, there are people who are really good. They have an eye for
Mhm.
covers. They know how to do it. I mean, they really truly do, and they can make their own covers. I cannot make my own cover. That would not be a good idea. So, starting with a good cover, good formatting, everything, really studying other descriptions, just making your product look as close as possible to what you're really competing against. Like you say,
Mhm.
competing, you're selling against other books in the genre. So, if you're a horror writer, I mean, you would want your stuff. I mean, I would not say look like Stephen King's, but you definitely want it to look like a horror cover and
Mhm.
and win there. So you take some studying to kind of figure that out and basically hiring professionals. So there's no glitches
Mhm.
because all it takes
Mhm.
is one glitch and there's 30 other authors out there who have a non-glitchy book. May not be as good of a story as yours, but you know you don't want to create any kind of barrier at all to buying your book. If
It's a
that makes
really
sense.
good call out. So if you have a limited budget when you were first starting out, thinking way back, and you're just getting started, um, totally agree, invest in the cover. If you're not a graphic artist, spend the money. A lot of other authors have mentioned editors, and we've talked about editing too.
Right.
Is that definitely like the next step?
Yeah, I would say that's next step. And you can take baby steps with this. I mean,
Mhm.
so like, like what I mean by baby steps is, you don't have to start out with a developmental editor. I mean, a full editing package, from start to finish is expensive. I mean, it's, to have it done right. Um, maybe building up, some contacts through other authors, other friends, and finding, like if I were to do this right now and like I didn't have the funds, the background to, the backing to do a full package, I would start out with a proofer, honestly. Get the book proofed, because there's, basic, they catch all the basic mistakes, sentence structure. I mean, yeah, that's an issue as well, but most proofers catch that as well.
Mhm.
Um, and everyone forms sentences differently. You can open up 8, 10 different books and find, from Dan Brown to like my stuff. I mean, everyone does things differently.
Mhm.
Some are more complicated, some are less, some are like, I mean, you ever, pick up Cormac McCarthy, I mean, you know, I love his books, but, it takes you about good 10 to 15 to 20 pages in to get used to a sentence structure. And there's a number of other authors like that. So I don't worry about that as much, but the proofing, you don't want misspelled words.
Mhm.
And missed periods and stuff like that. That just kind of reeks of of amateur hour, and and you are an amateur, but you're trying to fool everyone and thinking you're not. So by coming up with this professional product, as professional as possible, you really can you can get people and suck them in, and then they see your story, and then
Mhm.
and if your story's good, you're on your way.
Good. So when did you realize you could first become a full-time indie author?
Um, I think, yeah, that's a good question. Um, I'm going to use a date. I always think of the year 2013. It was after my fourth Black Flag book. So I wrote the Jakarta
Mhm.
Pandemic first. I really had no intention of carrying that on beyond that.
Mhm.
And just, flash forward, the readers really love those characters. So later down the line, I did go back to those books. I just created another crisis. It's this poor family. I hate to. You don't want my book. One book came true. You don't want the others to come true. They're even worse. So, but yeah, so I started the Black Flag series, created the Daniel Petrovich character and a whole other host of characters along with it, and got 4 books into that series when I had about 3 or 4 months where I had replaced my Pfizer income. Um, and I'm like, like, what's holding me back here from just,
Mhm.
making this complete transition? Because, I wasn't doing it full time. There were tons of things I couldn't do that I wanted to do, in terms of even networking, attending some conferences. I've been invited by friends, and I'm like, just don't have the time. I can't do it. And studying up more in marketing. I basically, over just a lunch with my manager, um, I just resigned basically. I mean, it was pretty much as simple as that. And I gotten to the point at that job where I'm like, I just didn't want to do it anymore. I loved the writing more, and I'll be very honest, I was most definitely stealing time from that job, from my
Mhm.
day job for this. So, and I realized I love this and I want to do this full time. And, it was kind of a no, I say it was no risk, but of course, as soon as I quit, and I had the worst month I had had in like 24 months, 2 years.
Oh,
It was just so weird. I mean, I think it was just like a quick, like, the fates, and yeah, it was just a very minor test for about 2 months. My wife's like, "How are sales going?" I'm like, "Oh, they're just as good as they've ever been." You know,
fingers crossed.
I'm like, boy, and I kind of like look at it, and I definitely blew up that bridge behind me, so we're not going back to Pfizer. Yeah, so yeah, it's definitely a little bit of nail biting, but that's where I had the follow on to the Jakarta Pandemic, the Alex
Uh-huh.
Fletcher series lined up. I kind of, 4 books into the Black Flag series, and I'm like, I need a break from it, and I knew that was coming in December, and based on how decent, how well the first book had done, I'm like, I think this is going to be fine, and it was. December
Uh-huh.
came, published, and then it just took off from. I mean, I've never once had a month after that where I looked back and gone, oh, I don't know if this is viable. So yeah, it was that. But
Gotcha.
it was it was like throwing that little curveball at me. It was crazy. I quit in September, and then like October, I'm like, oh man, what happened? Like maybe I should have waited one more month. I'm glad I didn't, because I probably wouldn't have. I probably would have delayed the whole thing about another 6 months or a year. So
Right. Well, it was
yeah,
meant to happen.
it was definitely.
Now, I understand you've just begun writing Vindicta, which is the conclusion to your longest standing book series. Can you
Right.
tell me a little bit about that book and your writing process?
Sure. So Vindicta has been, that's been it's been waiting in the wings, what you call it, for a long time. And I will apologize right up front to my black flagged series fans. It's just a million things have kind of not gotten in the way. I mean, great things, a book
Uh-huh.
deal with Thomas and Mercer, Amazon Publishing. It's just been a matter of finding the time to write this book. And I managed to sneak in book 5 in the series, Omega, in between other series. So I did sneak that one in, and it nearly killed me. Um, and so I have the time now, or I'm going to say now. I do have some news that's going to push it a little bit back. People are probably, if we lose like half of the people watching the webinar, it's totally my fault. But it will be done in the next 6 to 8 months.
Hmm.
I did sign another deal very recently, so it's going to have to just a little more patience. And I'm telling people who've been patient forever. So Vindicta is the 6th book in what I call the core series, and it will
Hmm.
finish the entire trajectory of this massive conspiracy that started, essentially in book 2. Book 1 was more background, kind of an origin
Uh-huh.
story. Yeah, so I know people are very eagerly awaiting, and that's a series that's more, I call it more serialized. It's not less series. So day, one book goes to the next one, if not the next day,
Hmm.
a month or two later. So they're
Gotcha.
very connected. Yeah, so I feel for all the readers who have been waiting so patiently, but I promise it'll be well worth it. I have the whole thing plotted out. I have a board just waiting, So when I know for a fact I have a good 3 months, it's done. So
Let's talk
and
about that for just a second.
yeah,
So you've got it plotted out and you've got a board. So I would say that you're a plotter, not a pantser.
definitely a combination of it, but some of these, especially these books, are just too complicated. There's 50, 60 characters, and they're not all main characters, but and there's 7 to 8 different subplots going at one time. I definitely overcomplicated this series. It's more of the early Tom Clancy style, very, it's still Clancy light, I would call it. It's not as complex as that, but yeah, in order to keep it all straight, I have to really kind of, at least I call it a tempo chart, where I know,
Uh-huh.
you know, I know like I'm not spending too much time in an area I shouldn't be. So that's, for this
Right.
one, I don't plot it out as much as um, I just, it's like a weighting, like I used to use a sticky board, and I put a sticky note for every chapter or scene, and I could just, I put it on the board, and I could tell basically, is it weighted correctly? I took this one a little further because I know I'm going to have to jump into it, and I'm going to be under a
Hmm.
timeline to do it. So I do have it very, very roughly plotted out, and halfway through, who knows where it'll be. Honestly, that's a lot of my books end up like that. I know how they're going to end,
Uh-huh.
essentially. And I know the major points along the way, but getting there can change. I can drop an entire line if need be. Um,
Right.
I always end up, it's like, I was talking with my wife about this the other day. The last book I wrote, I didn't plan out the chapters. I was writing it, and I always end up between 62 and 70 chapters, always.
Wow.
And the funny thing is, like, that could be 90,000 words or 130,000 words. It just always,
Uh-huh.
so like I think just kind of over time, kind of intuitively, you know, can get there. So I don't feel like I need to tightly plot it, like some people have it like just really, really tight. And I've tried that before, and I've just, I'll go like 6 days later, I'm like, why do I only have like 5,000 words or less? I feel like I'm just staring at a screen, and I'm like, it's because like I'm just constrained by this and I don't want to do it. So I kind of
Uh-huh.
lift, I just kind of lift those restraints, and the words flow. So yeah, definitely a
Okay.
combination, but there's no way to do some of these books without, having a pretty solid idea where you're going.
Gotcha. So tell me about your kind of what your day looks like. How much time do you spend writing? How much time do you spend on the business aspect?
Yeah, so ideally, do you want to know like what I should? So when I'm actually working like I should be, like my wife would like me to be, so that I'm not like literally typing stuff out at midnight on the night of a deadline. Um, that's a little bit of a problem of mine. I set a deadline that's almost
Uh-huh.
worse because then I will work right up to it. But I get up. I used to get up very early. That's how I got my start. And this is I always recommend people who don't, they have day jobs and they don't
Mhm.
have all day to ponder and pine away here, on the stuff. I used to get up at 4 in the morning. Fairly. I mean, actually, I did that for 2 to 3 years straight to the point it was
Oh,
so
wow.
ingrained. Yeah, it was such an ingrained habit that Christmas I would be up. I would be up sometimes 3:30, 4. I have to go to bed at 9, so I was not much fun, like a definitely party pooper. Um, but that really worked out well because it gave me that time before work, quiet
Mhm.
time. So obviously I don't do that anymore. I would love to actually. If I could go to bed later and get up then, it would be awesome because you get so much done, so much out of the way.
Uh-huh.
But ideally for me, since I do have all day to do it and, I'm not trying to stress myself out too much with this. Um, Ideally I work from like around 9. I get going around 8:30 or 9,
Uh-huh.
after walking the dog, just taking care of stuff at the house, um, yeah, 9, put a good 2.5, 3 hours in, and then put another couple hours in the afternoon in
Mhm.
writing or plotting or just staring at the screen, researching, whatever you want to call it, trying to stay off social media, not very successful for
Oh,
me.
no.
As the author of the Jakarta Pandemic, I've had a bit of a hard time, keeping my opinion to myself over
Oh,
the last
I
since
bet.
since January. So yeah, it's been a
Right.
bit stressful. I've added a lot of stress onto myself that didn't need to be there. Um, but yeah, and so I think ideally I can get the words I need to get done in about 4 hours. It's just a matter of really
Okay.
just buckling down and doing it. I mean, it's so easy at home to walk outside. I take trips to the mailbox for no reason, and we have a garden now, so I have another reason to be out there. I'm very good at that. So, but I think ideally 4 to 5 hours solid would be great. And then I spend about an hour, probably an hour or 2 hours a day. Sometimes
Mhm.
not as much on the marketing side of it. I'm always looking. I do a lot of different things. I have some ads running through
Mhm.
Amazon Marketing Services, some Facebook ads, that kind of target different platforms, and I go and study those. I look at them just see if there's
Mhm.
anything I can kind of optimize. I like to look at what like the new books are in the genre, what do they look like? I don't have a real hard fast like checklist, which I probably should. I look at, I do look at reviews, just see if they're coming in for new books, make sure there's nothing crazy. Um, Obviously look at sales, and that kind of
Gotcha.
thing. Um, and I do have like, and I'll have like sometimes longer standing projects. Like if I'm going to revamp
Mhm.
advertising, that's like something I'll just kind of attack, a little at a time. Sometimes I'll take an entire day to do it, to do it. And if I just feel it,
Mhm.
that's very random. I don't assign a day to it. But if I'm like, I just can't give this 30 minutes and let me just get it off my head, off my mind and get it all done. But I don't, I really try not to work outside of work hours. But it's hard, with this, you're essentially running a business. So it's very hard
Right.
not to be watching it. And, on the weekends, I find myself kind of staring at stuff and it's like, my wife's always like, what are you doing? Not adversarially, but she's like, oh, what are you up to? And like, I can never really define it. I'm like, I'm just like kind of like looking at things,
Uh-huh.
because I do find stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, that's, I like the way these authors are doing their descriptions now, or this, you kind of have to keep up with, with changes or, looking into
Right.
new strategies. A lot of it's research. I read a ton of articles, on that,
Mhm.
really do form the basis for a lot of the conspiracies or a lot of the technology, a lot of plot points in the book. So that's the other thing. I'm like, like, why are you reading a book about, Eric Prince's latest, like overseas kind of like a paramilitary, you know, venture? And I'm like, because, I based the last, you know, this is like fodder for, yeah, for these stories. You never know what's going to come out of them.
Right. Let's dial back to marketing for a minute.
Yeah.
What marketing tactic has been most successful for you to engage new readers?
All right. So, you know, it's not so much one
Hmm.
single tactic, you know, and these have evolved over time. So if you'd asked me the same question in 2011, 12, you know, 13, I would have said BookBub. All right. So that was like
Okay.
that was like a big, you know, and that was great for building
Hmm.
readership, mailing lists. But over time, you know, you know, that's taken on a life of its own, and it's no longer what I would consider to be enough. So like, I think
Hmm.
the most successful, when I really look at it, like, you know, for dollars spent and, you know, sales brought back and readers, and I think one of the most successful programs has been the Amazon Marketing Services through KDP. There's
Hmm.
a couple variations of it. There's, you know, one outside of KDP and one inside, but I've always I was in a I think I was in a beta program long ago in the beginning, and then I've always just stuck with it, and
Hmm.
that's done very well. Now that's changed as well. You know, it's very competitive. You do have to study and you have to know what you're doing with that. But I think it's a great start because it gets your books right in front of the readers. People who are looking
Hmm.
for a thriller, they're looking for, like in my genre, you know, a certain author, and you know, it gives you a chance of being seen by someone looking for that. So if they like don't want to spend $14.99 on the latest, you know, traditionally published book, or or it's up for pre-order, say, you know, because you know there's a
Hmm.
lot of, you know, a big time lag between books. You know, they may like Sears and go, you know, that looks the same. It's got good reviews, and you know, I'll take a shot, you know, for $3.99 or $4.99 or $5.99, whatever the price. So I
Hmm.
would say that's been great. Facebook, you know, I've used that as well, and that's actually a very viable route as well.
Hmm.
It just it's a little more, I would say, a little more complicated. I think you can get a PhD in like Facebook marketing, and I don't have time to get a PhD in it. So, you
Right.
know, the AMS, the in-house built-in system, just a
Hmm.
lot easier. So, and you know, the other aspect is building a mailing list. You know, and this isn't something you
Hmm.
can just like, you know, snap your fingers and now you have a mailing list. You know, this does come with it comes with sales, you know, people, you know, getting to the end of your book and signing up for it. But I think that's really a powerful. I mean, those are your readers. I mean, those are the people that have, you know, typically stuck through to the end, and they liked it enough to actually give you your email. So that
Right.
I built that up over time, and I think that's probably, you know, the most impactful. I mean, it's how I
Hmm.
get the word out, and if I have sales or deals and stuff, you know, yeah, I think that's, you know, that's a very, very, very powerful marketing tool. But they all work together because in order to get a mailing
Hmm.
list, you have to obviously sell books, and to sell books, you have to do some kind of marketing and advertising. Um, you know, and there's a lot of different platforms that can kind of, you know, get your book in front of people's faces. Yeah.
So let's talk about when you first started using Amazon advertising. Um, I know that we always get a lot of questions about budgeting. You know, how do you budget in order to afford the advertising? So can you talk a little bit about that? I'm not asking you to go into details and give me numbers,
Right.
but more along the lines of, you know, do you do a percentage of sales? Do you kind of how do you figure that out to start with?
Right. So, yeah, it's hard. You know, it is different. So, like in my, you know, like in my case, you know, with the series, you have like, you know, I kind of use like what you consider like the loss leader, you know, theory. So I don't
Hmm.
offer a free book, but you know, I will offer the first book, you know, at a discount to the rest of them. And you know, like a lot of times, I'm not looking to recoup the money I spend on that first book, you know, because I'm, you
Hmm.
know, looking at statistically, I know X percentage of readers will go on to book two, and I can look back historically. You know, it's the nice thing, you know, about the system through Kindle Direct Publishing is you have access to all this kind of data, so you can really see like you know, X amount of sales, you can see exactly roughly how. I mean, it's not an exact science, but
Hmm.
you can make a pretty good calculation how many people go on to book two and then book three and book four
Hmm.
and book five. and you can see how many people, how many pages are read, and and you can figure out how many, how you get paid on that, and what that ratio is. So you have a pretty rough, you can make a pretty rough calculation. Can I afford to
Mhm.
take a loss or break even on book one? So I factor that in without going into detail.
Right.
And you can do that, and with two series, I can do that.
Mhm.
For a shorter series, it gets tougher. It's a little harder
Mhm.
of a calculation. For a brand new author, obviously you're not able to really do that. So I mean, I think the bet, if I were doing this now, my strategy, would be to start pretty small in terms of, smaller budgets, and just try to build some slow momentum with that, and try to
Mhm.
like really kind of figure out. And obviously, the more books you have, the more often you can, frequently you can publish, and maintain your quality level, obviously. That just goes without saying. The better off you
Mhm.
are, because then that gives you that cushion to be able to, give away or discount book one, and go from there. But without that, I would say, a single book, hopefully in a series. I always recommend a series. I know not everyone wants to hear that. People want to write the great American standalone novel, and yeah, it just, the way things are, series really, they really can, they're really beneficial and help you with marketing
Mhm.
down the line.
Right.
But with a single book, yeah, starting out small, and testing the waters, doing research. You really have to. There's some great marketing books out there. There's probably a lot, um, and I know that, and I know you guys have. KDP has a lot of, like self-help tutorials. You can really dig
Right.
into this, and see how to do it. There's no way to trick
Mhm.
the system. I mean,
Right.
there just isn't. But there are very steady, methods to use, and
Mhm.
manage an early spend to kind of just figure out, what readers respond. So, like I said, it takes some work. It's not, this is I've been doing it for a long time, and
Uh-huh.
I still like rack my brain at times, with this. And I know plenty of authors who do a lot more marketing than I do. I do a little less now that I have, Thomas and Mercer, the Amazon
Mhm.
Publishing, more of a traditional publishing setup. They do a lot for me. But I
Mhm.
still have three series. I have some others that I work on as well, and you have to keep up, because if you don't, it stops working. So, there's always a way to figure out why. There's always a reason, and it just takes time.
So we'll talk a little bit. So you are both traditionally and self-published right now.
Right, right. So I, obviously started, and this is, this kind of goes back to my like origin story, because when,
Mhm.
when I was reading about like, what do I do with this book, submit it to agents, well, you have to like get an agent, then they submit it. I mean, it just seemed like, it's going to take a long time. And then there was all these stories of like, if you self-publish, you've killed every chance you'll ever have of doing anything, whatever, and I really do think that was like kind of like put out there, that had to have been promoted, like kind of like an active misinformation measures by traditional publishing at that time. I'm convinced of it, because my experience has been entirely the opposite. I mean, if you can prove that you can, market yourself, you can,
Mhm.
write a good story that people read without, without all, whatever that traditional publishing, can do for you. Um, I mean, you're like a slam dunk. So, having built that success self-publishing most definitely, caught the eye of my current publisher. I've
Mhm.
had numerous, offers of representation, which I just haven't really needed it at this point, because,
Right.
because I kind of got in with my publisher by myself without an agent, and I'm still with them, and I have
Mhm.
I'm not going anywhere. So, I pitched them my next series or the next book, and, it's just a done deal. So I don't, it's, and I want, keep that cut of the royalties. So yeah, I just, yeah, I haven't had a need to do that. So, yeah, it's worked out. That has worked out great. And, outside of Thomas and Mercer, I've been
Mhm.
approached by other, traditional, like, the big, big five, Manhattan, that whole level of publishing. And, so I don't buy that at all, that it's, the route that it'll cut you off from any avenues. If anything, I think it opens them up.
Yeah, I think that was wishful thinking of some of the big author or big publishers when self-publishing first came around, but I think over the years, everybody's opinion is kind of adjusted and changed a little bit.
Right, right. And now they want you to do all your marketing.
Right.
Things are that's it. I mean, you're essentially, you're going to do a lot of that stuff anyways. So, and you
Uh-huh.
should, you should be, you know, getting your own word out there. I think that I like having that kind of control of it, over the situation.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Well, we've gotten some questions coming in, so I think we can take some of those. We have one question. Before COVID, did you do any in-person events or book signings?
So, um, I would do two conferences a year, and they are all both thriller related. The big one was BoucherCon. That's a lot of the other authors I talk to and deal with. They essentially convinced me that's the one to be at, and you get to do
Mhm.
a lot of networking with other authors. And sit on panels. It's a great time. So yeah, pre-COVID, definitely did that. I've never been to Thriller Fest, though I did sign up this year to go to that. And obviously
Got
it's not
canceled.
happening. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I don't, there's a couple others, in the throw. This was the year I'm going to start going to like even more. And, that's not happening. Um,
Right.
so yeah, I mean, I really do go to them more to network, than
Mhm.
to, I don't go to the craft. I've just never been to a craft, like a craft fest, as I guess you would call it. So like for
Mhm.
Thriller Fest, they have all that. I've never done that, or pitch fests and stuff.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's fun. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, we sit around in our offices virtual. I mean, honestly, if I didn't turn on the news, I wouldn't even know if COVID-19 was happening. I mean, maybe when I got to the grocery store and they told me to put on a mask, I'd be like,
Right.
what happened here? What? Oh, because this has been my life. So it's
Uh-huh.
good if you're doing this full time to get out. But even if you're not, going to conferences, within your genre I
Mhm.
recommend it. But I think like going
Mhm.
to the more less craft oriented one will give you a better opportunity to kind of like talk with, kind of chat with people because you don't feel the pressure. I feel no pressure to
Mhm.
go to anything when I'm at these things. I'm really there to kind of talk with people and meet them.
So have you, now that, yeah, 'cause to your point, the a couple of the events that you mentioned both were canceled. What have you done anything, or how do you network now where everything's virtual? Do you have author groups that
Yeah, I
talk
do.
with, or
Yeah, a couple different author groups, and one of them we meet like once a year, at least, sometimes
Mhm.
twice a year. I have a couple of those, and those, that's another thing that I do miss. But that's just within a kind of a small group of authors, we all decided, we chit chat on Facebook so much, private message and email. We might as well just get together and hash all this out, a couple of, like once or twice a year. So we'll
Uh-huh.
kind of meet as locally as possible. But yeah, now it's harder. Obviously Zoom.
Mhm.
I've done a number of those. And I just, it's just a matter of like, it's just keeping up through social media posts. I would, it's the same as it was before. I wouldn't say I'm, talking with people more. And for me, I'm like, it's really like dependent on what I'm working on because I do kind of mess myself over with these deadlines. I'm not going to lie. I get, my wife's like, start on your book now, please. I beg of you. You do not want to be thinking about this over Christmas. It's due after Christmas. But she's
Uh-huh.
like, just get it done. So we're not, we're not watching you slink around the house and because I get into the brain, I get it on my brain
Uh-huh.
when I'm just thinking about that 24/7, all these ideas
Right.
and stuff. So when I get into those modes, I kind of drop off the face of the earth for a while. I don't answer emails like, so I go in after I'm done writing, I'm typing out, very sorry for the long delay. I'm like, I'm famous for that. I think all my emails start that way. Um, I do get kind of like drawn into that world. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's hard. It is hard, to do that. I mean, I used to have a writing group in Maine. We'd meet
Mhm.
once a month. That was awesome. Very helpful. And they wrote in different genres, so you'd learn a lot about other things. But yeah, that
Mhm.
stuff's kind of, it's not necessarily the same when you're doing it, through virtual meetings. But I still recommend it. I think people should really do it because I do miss a lot of interaction. I have a blast when I'm on there. I'm like, why haven't I been doing this more?
Gotcha. All right. Not sure about that question. So there's a question about when you decided to leave your day job, did you feel like you needed to reach a certain level of success or circulation before you felt comfortable doing it? Or was it, as you mentioned, you reached a point where I don't enjoy this anymore, I enjoy this more, so it's time to leave?
Yeah, it was it was definitely a combination of two, and that was a tough time at for that industry I was in. I mean, I think this is my third manager in like a year.
Oh,
They were just doing constant restructurings, and I went from covering a small territory to the entire state of Maine, which doesn't sound big, but going from southern Maine where I live to the northernmost
mhm,
points it's a 5-6 hour drive. So I
right.
was just growing less and less, you know, interested or enamored with that job, and the
Mhm,
writing was picking up. So book 4 in the series, but I did like say to myself that I would really only seriously consider this when the sales had at least come. I mean, we were a dual, like, in full disclosure, we were a dual income family at that point. So even on that aspect, there was some built-in security. But I wanted
mhm,
to actually replace the income that I was making or come close to it, you
mhm.
know, in terms of benefits I may not have. So yeah, I mean, yeah, so it was definitely a combination of the two. And it didn't take much, where the job dissatisfaction came in, I guess you could call it, or just kind of bored with it, was, it allowed me to very quickly, like very quickly leave. It wasn't like,
Uh-huh.
oh, this. I was literally like, yeah, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. And having a manager like what? I'm like, yeah, yeah, that's it. And I called my wife on the way home. I like said, I'm done with them. Done. And
Uh-huh.
she's like, yeah, and that's always, I probably said that a billion times. We say that in general, like, I'm
Right.
done with this. I'm done with that. And it's kind of, she's like, oh, what do they do now? Because there's been a lot of turnover. And what do they do now? And
Right.
no, actually, I'm done with them. She's like, oh, no, but maybe we should have had a discussion about that. I'm like, maybe. So,
Hindsight,
all the,
maybe that
all
should
the
have
more
been a
reason not
priority,
to,
but
yeah, all the more reason not to mention the slight dip in
right.
sales the next month or so after. Yeah. So hope that answered the question.
Gotcha. Yes.
I do not, yeah, don't get me wrong, disclaimer here. I do not recommend you just quit your day job and it's just go full-time writing unless you're getting there, or
Right.
you win a prize or something in the lottery. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Find a briefcase of money, but doing that's like a whole novel. So, it's like a,
Right, right. All right. Let's see. What are your tips on pacing and writing action scenes?
hmm, good. That's a good question. So I probably overdo it, honestly. The last novel I turned in to my editor, I sent it with a warning. I said it's technically the last book in that series, the Ryan Decker series.
Mhm.
If I continue it, it'll be on my own, and that would be later. But I wrote it so it finishes it. And I warned her, I'm like, this is like it starts and it doesn't stop. So, there's and I said I left some time. Like I came in a little. I didn't come in shorter words, but what I typically turn in, like usually like 95, 100, and I kept it about 5,000 short, just the way it worked out. And I said we have plenty of, we can add in some downtime if we need to, some
Mhm.
cushion. But they didn't. None was added. So actually, we added more action to it. So I think I I don't follow this as a rule, but I think generally what ends up happening is, there's always a big, it's like a sine wave. You ever see these charts? I forget what they're called. There's definitely like a model for this. There's like a
Right.
one up and down and another one and then another one. Well, I have like that, but there's like another one. So like there's
Uh-huh.
there's an extra one typically at the end. It starts out
Gotcha.
fast. They almost all start out. They do. They start out fast. You get the reader, invested, engaged, heart rate up, and put them through a lot. I said put the reader through a lot of a lot of stress in the very beginning, and then let them down, kind of build the conspiracy. And then there's a second phase, which is like kind of, I build onto this. The second phase is usually a build onto what you might think of as the finale, which is like a
Mhm.
major, thing. So there's like another bump, and then there's a big bump, and then a little come down, and there's almost always another major bump at the end. So I don't know if that
Gotcha.
helps, but that I just like, I think it's giving it an extra, it's one more than the formula, I think.
Right.
And I
Right.
think usually what it is I do two larger bumps toward the end. So, and they're both almost
Gotcha.
always of equal intensity. So like in this
Oh,
last book,
wow.
there might have been six bumps. I don't know. So people, readers are tired by the time they get to the end of it. Um, and I've thrown in like stuff at the end where you really, everything was resolved that needed to be resolved in the book,
Mhm.
like the core story. And then I throw in like another just crazy thing at the end. So yeah,
Gotcha.
I don't,
Well,
yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. Um, so did you have a heavy social media presence when you first started out? And if not, how'd you decide to build that? And let's talk about that for a minute.
So the worst day of my life was the day I opened a Facebook account because it's consumed, half of my life since then. Um, I only really recently got into Twitter, and that's consumed the other half. No, no, I did not. I did not have a presence. I had no
Mhm.
mailing list. This is all, and it's because I started earlier. I mean, I did start a
Mhm.
while back. So I really, if to be completely honest, I think I started my Facebook account because of this, to start a
Okay.
presence. It was one of these things. So yeah, I am, and same thing with the mailing list. Obviously that, and I was slow. I didn't do it how I should have, with a nice link at the end, and it's just, it took some learning to get to that point where, I was building up these things like I should have, like an author page, an actual author page, not just, me and things like that. So I didn't start with that, but I did build it up and I've taken it fairly seriously. I mean, I have in terms of Facebook, so I have my personal page and I post all my book stuff on there as well because it's hard to
Mhm.
really, I know some authors have shifted everyone over to an author page and, I've put out
Mhm.
those announcements saying, hey, let's do that. And, some people go over. So I have a dedicated author page and the books and stuff will link to that. And I also have like a reader group. So right now
Gotcha.
that's reader group's closed, but that was formed, by taking all those other groups and saying, hey, I'm forming a small kind of private group. We
Mhm.
can do a little more. And if you want in, now's the time. And I'll probably open up again to let people in. I need to do that. I probably take a note when I get off this to like open that up again and start letting, because there's people that have been around forever. I recognize the names
Right.
from 8 to 10 years ago. I mean, it's pretty cool.
Wow.
Same with
Uh-huh.
emails. I get an email out of the blue like, hey, and I'm like, oh yeah, John, from Alaska, one of the first people I correspond with. So it's
Right.
yeah. So I built it up, and I mean that's what you have to do. I mean, but definitely take it seriously because I do, it helps immensely.
Okay. Good. Well, on that note, we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's event. A special thank you, Stephen, for your time and really great information.
Great, great. Hope it helped.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you
Well,
for
listen,
joining us. And as always, happy publishing.
bye.